Hey guys, since the setup related and motec related videos have quite good traction on YouTube, I thought I just might do another. And so this morning I took a look at one of the special events, which is the one on Hungary in Budapest, using the 219 version of the Lamborghini EVO, and turned out quite well. I don't really notice too many people in here, actually no one if I'm honest, so hard to tell if those times are any good because my gap is quite big, so I'm skeptical that these were in particular very good. But a main thing about this is I tried one earlier where I figured out just after a couple laps the setup just wouldn't get me there, so I did a couple changes and this changed the car almost completely, and it became drivable and would get around the track in, I don't know, gain like half or even a second in some laps. So what I want to show you basically is how the aggressive setup drives, and then do a couple changes, explain to you why I do those, and show you the comparison potentially in motec as well if there's something to view. Because I did this mainly by feeling, but I'm quite certain that we can show something in... Stop talking, man. In motec as well. So we can go down with a fuel load in the aggressive setup. Usually the traction control setting is way too aggressive. I'll usually use one on both, but the track is rather bumpy and the setup isn't particularly well, so we will need a higher setting here to cope with the track specifics. I'm not going to change any pressures for now because else I have nothing to show you what's wrong with the setup. Keep everything in the damper settings as well as is. Also stay with the brake bias for now, and basically everything before touching some things. Fuel load I figure was 2.71 is what I used on the stint, so this calculation here doesn't really get me anywhere, but I think 40, 46-ish, 47-ish was the total amount I used, so there's just a little extra for that. Shouldn't make too much of a difference. Just to be sure I'm recording. Alright, I do. Then let's start with the aggressive set and let's see how this goes. Warm the brakes on the couple meters that you have towards the start finish line, because else you will have to brake really early for the first corner on the first lap, because the brakes just don't bite. But if you heat the brakes just a tiny bit, you can already brake way closer to the actual braking point. First corner is alright, and the aggressive setup as well. Let's see for the second. There's a little too much oversteer. Let's see how we can get the car around the tricky bits in here. There, the oversteer is insane actually. And through here, doesn't want to get into. On the throttle seems alright, but the entry wasn't really representative for a fast lap. Short shift through here. It's not too bad, I expect the worst to be honest. Maybe I just learned to drive the car better. That's a bit understeery. Understeery on the brakes as well. Didn't really turn on the throttle there. Doesn't get inside as I would want it. Let's see the lap time. Nah, this isn't good. I started with a 45.9 or something on my setup. Let's try a couple more laps. Brake later now. Still make the turn easily. Could do even later if I was aggressive. delta showing already 3/10 gain compared to the first lap. Let the car rotate itself, then easy on the throttle. Slight lift to make the apex. Costs a bit of time, of course, could be done better. Can use the curb a lot here, not like this. It's tricky because you can't see it, right? And over the bumps actually works alright here. But the lap time just won't come down to what I would want to see. And then on the turn in, it's a bit twitchy again. So it's quite unforgiving. And not as fast as I would be on the set that I built. Traction control quite active. Let's do one more lap because I think that would show us already some issues. Take a look at the pressures and the temperatures all around the car. We can already see the fronts don't really get there pressure wise. Barely a 45. Best lap on my setup is a 44.9 in this exact same event and fuel load and all. Better through there, gives me a 10th right away. Maybe here as well. Later turn in. It just doesn't want to be nice through there. So there's some problem definitely that we can solve. Bumps here, activate the traction control a lot. Short shift again. Adjusting the speeds through there a little using the throttle because I was too slow on entry. I'm too fast here, so I'll wait a little longer before I use the throttle again. It was better than the lap before, definitely, as seen on the delta. Can use more of the curb on the outside. That's a long corner, needs patience. Again, a lot of traction control despite me not being fully on the throttle. So and again, just a 45.5, and this is already, I think 44.5 is the average I did on my setup. Pressures and temperatures are not changing anymore, so this is probably how it's going to stay throughout the stint, which clearly shows the front tires not really being where we want them to be. So let's return to the garage and review some things that we might want to change. And damn it, I didn't turn on the telemetry, so can't show that. But what we can see is already the hot pressures, which is about 0.8 of a psi to few. So I would add 8 clicks here around that. Might be less actually because I changed the balance of the car and then the fronts are used more, so the pressure might change by itself a little, so I don't actually need to put 8 more clicks, but rather 6 or 7 if I make the car more understeery. Same for the front right, we would need almost 10 clicks here. On the rear there's about 5, this is about 7. Then I didn't really like how the car responded over bumps. It didn't allow me to use the throttle, or I could use the throttle, but the traction control would shut the engine down almost completely, so there was no acceleration out of, what is it, 1, 2, 3, 4, turn 5, I think. The long right-hander up the hill where famously Alonso passed Schumacher on the outside in the rain, if you remember, or are very old. And The electronics were fine so far. And what I also didn't like, I told you I had a lot of understeer under the braking. So the first thing I would do is, and this is partly experience, partly very visible in this very lab, we could go backwards with a brake bias quite a lot. So from 61 almost below 59, so that's 2% further to the back. Every time I go on the throttle, the car becomes kind of twitchy, which which I would say is down to the differential kicking in a bit too heavy. So I turned it down a little to have a bit of smoother transition when I hit the throttle. I know I didn't change anything on almost all of these. I think I only changed the bumps of range maybe on the rears. We'll load the new setup in a second. I definitely did not like how the car responded on the damper base, and there was also something about the aerodynamics that I didn't particularly like. And then a last thing would be the temperature on the rear. Looked fine after 3 laps, but I know it gets worse along the line because the car is just a bit too oversteery. Therefore, I did a couple things on the new set that start with aerodynamics. I would add one more click of brake ducts to the rear. This is not because the brakes got too hot, but the brakes reaching 600, 900 degrees something. This heats the rim, this heats the whole suspension, and therefore it also heats the tire, builds more pressure, and the tire becomes more, or has a harder time to get rid of all the temperature. So with more brake cooling, we can actually also cool the rear tire, which is the aim of opening the brake ducts a little more on the rear. Then also I think the overall balance was a bit, like the aero balance was a bit too far to the front, which means the front has a lot of grip while compared the rear has a little too few. So and I also felt ground clearance isn't really an issue. So if we use lower front ride height, we get a little more aerodynamic downforce out of that, which is seen by the, you can see it, show you again, the brake bias, not the brake bias, of course, the front aero variation, as they call it here, moves further to the front if we lower the car, so there's a little more downforce generated there. But also, I don't want the balance to go forward even more, I just want to increase the downforce overall, so I lowered the car by, I think it was 2 clicks. We'll confirm in a second when I load the setup. So we did a couple changes now. That was down to pressures. It was down to temperatures while I reduced the brake duct. Then changed the brake bias because the car was rather understeery into the turns and it was nowhere near oversteery when turning in. So there wasn't a problem with the rears locking or so there's potential to use more on the rear while still using full grip on the fronts. Electronics didn't need any changing. And then we only have to talk about dampers a bit. I find this overall, this is quite a hard setup. And especially over the small bumps, you want the dampers to be able to take the sudden forces that they experience, which means they must not be strong but rather soft, and especially bumps means we have the fast part or the fast bump and rebound damper that has to eat that. So what I did was to reduce all fast bump and rebound to make the car a little smoother over the, I think I did even more here, to make the car smoother over those tiny bumps, keep a little more traction there, less likeliness of the car stepping out, and less likeliness also of the traction control kicking in. I think that reduced a lot on the rear. I would reconfirm once I load the setup. And then I didn't like a couple things. So when I stepped on the throttle, the rear wouldn't take it too well, so I thought the rear bump damper might be a bit too hard, so I want to allow the car a little more movement there, so I went a little down with a bump damper on the rear as well. But then on the other hand, I also didn't want the car to do massive turn in when going into the turn and when with the rear lifted up. So I also wanted the car to allow a little bit more of movement on the rear axle, which should keep the tire a little firmer on the ground when turning into the corner, with the rear very light. Similar to that would mean that we do the front a little stiffer, but I need to reconfirm what my thought exactly was there. And then I didn't like how the car oversteered on corner exit, which means particularly left ones. So I actually dampened the rebound a little more. That is when the front goes up. I want a little less movement of that. And just as a picture, if the whole chassis moves up, it pulls the front wheel with it, creating a little understeer. So I made that a little stiffer as well, just to get the car a little more straightened out instead of the rear doing more turning under acceleration. I think I did allow, for the same reason of not having a too aggressive turn in, allowed a little higher bump stop range on the rear. Don't know exact value, so I think this was all the changes that I did. And then there's pressures, and I think I changed toe as well. Let's have a look and I'll show you. You can also see I already renamed the setup to the temperature we're driving in, because this is the main factor that decides about which pressures we have to use. Let's have a last look. This is 25.0, 25.3, the left tire is being the main target. Let's load it, and where we end up is 5 clicks more on the rear, 10 clicks more on the front actually. Same for both right side tires. Well, you can see I did change toe as well. It was minus 0.2 before on the fronts, which gives you quite a aggressive turn and reaction of the car, and I wanted less of that, so I reduced the negative toe on both front wheels. But I also wanted the car to be because I took out quite a lot of rotation out of the car with changing the aero balance further to the rear, so the rear wouldn't turn as much as the front would. Was it said correctly? Yeah. And to get something back of that, I changed the toe to lesser value. It was 0.12 maybe, or even more. So I reduced that by quite a bit. I had setups where I actually used negative rear toe to get rotation into the car, but it's not necessary for now, I feel. And to take some more temperature out of the rear tire, I reduced the rear camber just by a click. This is actually, yeah, I remember that well. The brake ducts, the right height, and then we see the dampers. Yeah, I think this is actually what I did. Talked to you about it a minute ago. The fuel level, oh, it's even less, so you can go with 48 liters. We have traction control and ABS on 2 as well. So I think this is all the changes. I touched basically everything without the cambers and the caster. Also, yeah, you can see I increased the bump stop range here. Didn't touch the springs. I think they were fine. Could do more testing to extract even more lap time, but for now I think that was perfectly fine. The brake bias moved a lot to the rear. Didn't change the roll bars, just a differential to have a bit more predictable reaction of the car when exiting the turn. Changed basically all dampers, at least a little, allowed especially for more fast movements of the suspension over bumps, and increased the downforce on the front, or rather maxed out more. You can't take more. You can't get more out of the car. You can't put it any lower. There's no splitter on the EVO. And reduced the rear right height just to balance the aerodynamic a bit more to the rear. Didn't change the wing. There's another thing, but there's not really long straight, so there's no point in really reducing downforce on the rear wing. And one more click would change the balance quite significantly, which I think the balance is alright for now, so no need to act there. So let's try, I did 3 laps I think, and then let's compare again how the car behaves and how pressures and brake temperatures, or rather tire temperatures developed. Again, heat the brakes a little through the last corner. Maybe you want to focus how much the traction control kicks in. It should be quite visible that it's a lot less. Brake at 130 maybe on the first lap, before I go to 105, 110-ish meters on the second, when the tires are up to temperature and the brakes have some more bite. Immediately you saw that the rear stepped out with the old setup out of turn 2. This wasn't the case of now, so the car gives me a lot more confidence now. And it also stepped out here all the time. This is almost completely stable compared now. Now watch the bumps under acceleration. Way less traction control over the bumps. More turn in on the brakes. That was a bit too aggressive. Little stabilization on the throttle. Way more stability through here as well. Can be early in the throttle. That gains me a lot of time. Not too clean through here. Way less traction control here again. Now the last corner, a bit too much oversteer. The tire's still not there. But you can see the lap time is already almost a second faster than what I did the last time around. Check the pressures, they are almost where I want them to be. Wasn't too aggressive on the brake there, because there's more time definitely in turn 1 on the brakes. Just roll through there, let the car do its thing on the throttle. Take a tight exit to line up for turn 3 and take that one flat. Now the pressures almost reach 28 psi all around, which is where we want them to be. Use the curb, throw the throttle, slight correction on the wheel, but nothing major. The car just stays stable. Well over the bumps here, don't really have to care about it. It's still difficult to drive, but it's way easier to extract the lap time because you have more confidence. Car doesn't step out there at all. Better exit here now. There's probably still improvements to do. Especially last corner wasn't great, I think. Have to watch the track limits here a lot. And then we have a 45.3. 6-7 tenths faster than the last second lap we had in the other setup. A bit late on the brakes there. So in terms of lap times, this is alright. The pressures are now almost 28 all around the car. So that works. That is almost on point. The rear left tire isn't really hot, so that gives us nothing to worry about. Over the course of this stint. Short shift again here. Wasn't well. There's lots of time in that chaikin if you nail it. I think you can see again gaining time here. I think you can see that it's way easier for me to drive the car now with those settings because the rear doesn't step out too much, it doesn't understeer too much, it keeps rather stable. The traction control doesn't bother me too much, and I can just focus on driving rather than wrestling the car around. Pressure still all on 28 psi, temperature's alright. I would like more temperatures on the right tires, they look like just a tiny bit cold. But since basically all corners on that track go to the right, or all fast corners that heat the tires go to the right, we don't really have a chance to heat the outside, the inside, mainly inside tires more. We could do more changes to camber, maybe to the right side tires to get more temperature, but it's not really a problem. I think Pirelli says, and Ares in the forum also says that I think the tires work from 60 to 110 or so, so we're well in that window, and we can operate that. Let me switch quickly to motec, which I already have open, so I can show you some final thing that I experienced throughout the stint. This is the stint I did this morning, so this is actually the time that is on the leaderboard. So all those laps combined on the leaderboard, you can see the fastest lap was a 44.35, and I actually did that twice times in a row on point with the exact same thousandths. But I think the lap looked quite different. See, I lost like 2/10 somewhere in turn 4 or 5, and I gained it back towards the end. And what I wanted to show you is actually the tire pressures, and not just the pressures over one lap, but actually over the whole stint. So the stint started, what is it? It must be lap 4. That was some tests, so lap 4 was where the stint started. Let's zoom out then. And what we can see is the pressures. They need 1, 2 laps, 3 laps to build, and afterwards they're stable for 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 or 7 laps. Then they go down a bit. So in the stint, I think I had something at 28.2. You can see here. Actually, we don't need the comparison lap there. It just shows too much data. So the highs I had 28.3, and that went down as we go through the stint, ending, well, 28.0. So it stays rather stable. But say you would have that time multiplier or something, so the sun would go down quicker, the track temperature would go down quicker, also your pressures would decrease more, and you would have to keep that in mind when setting up the car for a stint. Same we can do with tire temperatures, especially the light blue one here is the left rear. So it goes up to 94, 95, max is out on, yeah, it's 95, that never reaches 96. So this is still well in the window. I think it starts getting bad at 100, 105 maybe, which you would see on Barcelona, for example. And then throughout the stint, it kind of gets a little cooler, going down to, where do we end up? 91. So the difference isn't really that big, but once you have once you reach the peak temperature of the tire, afterwards it will cool down a little. Yeah, if you drive that right, and it would have been way worse if we didn't change the setup and the rear tire would have been used more. We would more be looking like 98 or 100 degree, and this is something where I feel the tire already starts losing a little grip, and that means more oversteer, which leads to even more temperature, and things just get worse. So you want to stay in a proper window throughout the stint. Let's show something else, and therefore I want to zoom in on a single lap. Let's take one of those fast laps right there and compare it to the other fast lap. So what do we see here? This is what showed me how I need to change the fast dampers and rebound dampers on the car. So this is the main straight. This is the first corner. We brake down. Then we go for the small second straight. This is turn 2. And turn 3 is barely noticeable here because we go there flat out. But you see the data is shown here, turn 3. And then we brake for turn 4, just a little, which is the left one where we go over the curb a lot, which is here where the dampers travel really, really fast. So let's zoom in a little. And they travel almost, what is that, 450 millimeters a second. But let's look a little closer even. Let's look at the x-axis down here. So we're looking at a time 39.25 seconds to 39.35. So this span here, this covers a tenth. So say over the course of a tenth, the dampers travel really fast, and just a rough estimation, right? So if the damper travels fast over a tenth of a second at the speed of, well, let's say 400 millimeters on average, the suspension actually moves, say, 40 millimeters in a tenth. So which is, this is 4 centimeters. So this is the maximum speed and distance the suspension actually does. So it's not much, but it's a lot on a GT3 car. So to take that curb a little better, and for this to be possible in the first place and without the car stepping out and bottoming out and just becoming really unstable, you need the fast dampers and rebound dampers to eat this compression of the suspension, and therefore we want to have it soft. Then we go through turn 5, which is a long right-hander uphill where there's the bumps on the acceleration zone, which you can see here. And you can already see quite some oscillation building up over the bumps. And then there's the, say, bigger bumps at the end of the corner, fairly into the acceleration zone. And maybe we can even add something to the data here, which I want to have is the throttle position. So we can see how much I'm actually on the throttle at that point. So you can see once I enter the corner, I kind of blip the throttle a bit to stabilize the car, but most of the time I just wait. And then I increase it to, what is that, 65, 70% right here. And then slightly increase it as I feel the car is stabilizing to 100%. And now that I know the suspension can take the bumps, and the traction control will, if it is needed, solve it for me, we can just stay 100% on the throttle. And let me actually add traction control. I think it's TC. Yeah, it's TC. So and this is, I think, the main thing that you can now see where the changes in the fast dampers. I think this is the main thing after the aerodynamic balance. You can see that over these bumps, the traction control is inactive, right? You have that in mid-turn, when as soon as you hit the throttle, the whole balance of the car changes. Of course, the traction control kicks in a bit there. Over the course of, let me see, this is roughly 2 seconds where the traction control is active and changes a bit. Then it's active for a whole second, cutting down engine power. So I'm actually a bit too eager on the throttle here, could have done less. But once the car starts straightening out, and let's add something more to it even, which is the steering angle. So you should see that once I go to full throttle and once the traction control starts working, the car will be almost straight, which means I will be steering less. And yeah, that is exactly what you can see. So yeah, the graph isn't rather good. So the steering angle is 69 degrees still here. So throughout the turn, this is basically my steering angle from 80 to, I don't know, what is it? Yeah, let's say 80 down to 60 degree. And then as soon as I increase the throttle over here and the traction control kicks in, I steer less and less and less and less. And then here it's almost no steering at all, and once the traction control stops, I have straightened the car, and now this is just positioning already for the next corner and onto the curb. I think we can already end this here, but yeah. And I'll actually upload the setup so you can experience differences yourself. And guess thanks for watching. Keep it up with comments. I really like to be in touch with you and see how you find this analysis, if it's any useful, what else you want to know, and see you in a bit.